the beautiful Lapis lazuli stone of Afghanistan, a deep blue semi-precious stone prized since the ancient times for its intense colour. Lapis lazuli has been exported to the Mediterranean world and South Asia since the Neolithic age. The stone has also made its way across ancient Egypt, where it was commonly used for amulets and ornaments. In the magnificent funeral mask of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun, ancient Egyptian craftsmen used lapis to trace out his eyebrows. Contemporary lapis stone jewellery is also worn by celebrities such as Kate Middleton, Rihanna, Jennifer Lawrence and many more. However, now there are calls for it to be classified as a conflict mineral, as it is being linked to driving corruption and conflict in the country. This according to a report by the environmental organisation Global Witness, who has investigated Afghanistan's 6,500-year-old lapis mines for the last 2 years. These money-flourishing mines are causing violent competition amongst local strongsmen, MPs and the Taliban. The lapis is mined in Badakshan region in northeast Afghanistan, once one of the more stable areas even at the height of the Taliban control. The key players controlling the mines include Abdul Malik, a former commander with the Jamiat-e-Islamic political party and military faction, Zulmai Mujahidi, a prominent local elder in the Jurm district of Badakshan, Asadullah Mujahidi, brother of Zulmai Mujahidi, who was appointed in 2007 as the head of Parliamentary Security Force for the Lapis mines, and Mohammad Zakaria Sauda, an MP and former minerals trader and businessman. The Global Witness findings reveal rough estimates that the revenue going to these strongsmen and Taliban from just one small area rivals the government's declared income from the entire Afghanistan natural resources sector. Taliban and other armed groups are earning $20 million per year from Afghanistan's lapis mines. This has not only destabilized the once peaceful province into the hotbeds of rebellion, but also created a risk that these mines may fall into dangerous hands. The investigation also includes indication that Badakshan mines are a strategic priority for the Islamic State group, as they are reportedly growing their presence around the mines. Global Witness is calling for the government to ensure publication of mining data, reform mining oversight, and support community monitoring of mining. The Global Witness report states, Global Witness is calling for the Afghan government and its international partners to make problems around mining in Afghanistan a critical priority in order to tackle this crisis. In particular, the current mining law fails to put in place the fundamental safeguards of transparency, accountability, and community engagement that is needed to secure and develop Afghanistan's mining sector. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani has spoken of the dangers of the curse of this resource. In May of this year, the government announced new measures including plans to publish beneficial ownership information. However, unless the Afghan government acts rapidly to regain control, the battle for lapis mines is set to intensify and destabilize the country, and ultimately rob the opportunity for the country to flourish. Khadija Ahmed, Asia Wired.
Joining me to discuss this is the head of the Global Witness Afghanistan campaign, Stephen Carter. Thank you for joining us. So what impact will classifying this stone as a conflict mineral do?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, we have some reluctance in calling it a conflict mineral, but there's really no choice because the evidence we found after 2 years of research is that it's providing millions of dollars to armed groups, up to $20 million in 2014. And a substantial part of that is going to the Taliban, and it's really helping to drive massive instability and conflict in an area which has hitherto been relatively stable. What we've seen is that there's been a competition among armed groups for these resources. Now, some of those armed groups have an official sort of government cover, others are completely outlaw. But actually, the underlying dynamic is the same, that they've been competing, even when the mine was officially under government control, to control this resource and to extract it for their own benefit. And that has created the environment in which the Taliban has really been able to thrive in this area and become much stronger. And now they actually control more than 50% of the revenue that miners are paying to access these mines.
So in terms of the impact to the ordinary person in the country, this mineral is potentially the second most important treasure for Afghanistan. What sort of impact is it having on the country?
Well, I mean, across the whole country, these issues are replicated. So in Afghanistan, mining is the second largest source of revenue for the Taliban after drugs. But more to the point, Afghanistan is actually an immensely rich country. It's got these huge mineral resources which should be contributing towards development, towards stability, towards employment. Instead, what we see is that they are driving conflict, they're creating corruption, and they're providing very little benefit either for local people or for the Afghan government. And that's something which makes these resources a core strategic issue, and an issue not just of morality or legality, but for the actual future stability of the entire country. The problem is they've not been treated with that level of importance by either the Afghan government or donors.
So in terms of now the task going forward, what sort of recommendations are you putting forward to the government, to the international community?
Well, the problem of mining is, of course, linked to broader problems in Afghanistan, but there are a number of actions which really can have a very positive impact here and increase the price of abuses. So basically there's half a dozen things that are really important. The first thing is around security, that mining areas just have to be a higher priority for the security policy of the Afghan government and its partners. Because we've seen in places like Badakshan how much they are disproportionately contributing towards insecurity. Secondly, there's a whole range of transparency measures that can really help to reduce the levels of corruption and abuses around mining, and which really are the basic protections that we should be seeing put in place. So they include things like making the publication of the mining contracts a condition of their validity, publishing the production and payment data, above all, of the mines so that people can know how much has been produced, how much tax it's paid, publishing the beneficial owners, the real owners of the mining contracts, having a single transparent account for all the mineral-related payments. These are things which would make it much easier to expose the sort of abuses and reduce the massive loss of income from the mining sector that we've seen. Our estimate is that just from this small mining area, since 2001, the Afghan government has lost $100 million. Now, there's one other big area where we think you can make progress in tackling this problem, and that is getting the local communities involved. Now, that may sound a bit utopian, but actually it's extremely practical. If you can provide the local communities with a percentage of the legal revenues of the mines, you can give them a real incentive to support legal mining and to try and keep the people who want to take over the mines out. In Afghanistan, that can have a real impact. You can change the political dynamic around the mining areas in a way that everybody benefits. And it's in that way that neither that nor any of these other measures are going to be silver bullets, but actually, if you put them all in place, you really increase the cost of abuses and you can make progress on this issue. It's not an intractable problem.
But do you think in terms of weak governance, the Afghan government hasn't always, in the last few years, hasn't been known for its sort of firm stance on a lot of issues. Do you think their sort of weakness in their sort of security, how they approach security, and how they govern the country, do you think that's a major obstacle?
I think that the Afghan government has made some very positive recent declarations on this, actually. And they've made a commitment to put in place some of the key reforms, for example, the publication of beneficial owners of mining contracts and other contracts. That's a good foundation. But yes, I mean, the test for the Afghan government is going to be whether they can really tackle these abuses and whether they put in reforms that actually have an impact rather than just existing on paper. And I think that that's going to be a key test also for the donors. The donors need to do their part, but there's also a legitimate question for them, which is that if they're going to be providing huge amounts of money to the Afghan government, as they should, then is the Afghan government doing what it can to protect a resource that should really be one of its primary sources of income? And that's not something that we've seen so far. We think there's a positive sign the Afghan government may start to act now, but the test, as always, will be implementation.
And in terms of the exports of Lapis lazuli, a lot of it does go to China and other parts of the world. What sort of responsibility do they hold to this?
Well, I mean, absolutely. The great majority of the lapis is going out through Pakistan and on to China. And that gives the Chinese, I think, a particular role to play in solving this problem. None of this problem would exist if there wasn't demand, not just in China, but around the world for this product. And if we cut off the trade, then I think the pressure on the commanders who control the mining areas to reach some sort of agreement to cede the mines, to have legal extraction that benefited the local people, I think that pressure would be enormous. So really, China has got a very big opportunity to play a positive role here. And they have an incentive to do that as well, because among the armed groups that we see in Badakshan is the Islamic State. And although there's no evidence that they are directly benefiting from the mines, they have a close relationship with the Taliban. They probably receive logistical support. And the fighters with the Islamic State include separatists from China's Xinjiang region. It's a very complicated issue there, but I think there's a strong incentive for China to want to see Afghanistan as a whole be stable, and they've played a very positive role in the peace process, for example. So really, our hope is that they will see this as a matter of their own interest as well as the interests of Afghanistan.
And now moving on to another mineral. You also say that tourmaline is another sort of gemstone or mineral that's in a similar state. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, well, tourmaline is mined in Badakshan as well, and actually in many other parts of the country. It's much more widespread than lapis. And the extraction of tourmaline we've seen in Badakshan has been influenced by some of the same armed groups. So you have a lot of reports from miners of a mining force that was a government protection force for the mines actually being used by its commander to extract revenue from the mines. And there's a local MP whose brother is actually in command of this. It's there's a lot of reports of abuses, and that really reiterates the point that it's not just lapis. That actually tourmaline, the vast other mineral wealth of Afghanistan, everything from rubies to lithium, is subject to these sorts of issues. And we're seeing something which should be an absolute treasure for the Afghan people, instead being a poison. And if we don't want to see a really prolonged resource-driven conflict in Afghanistan, like we've seen in parts of Africa, for example, we've got to get much more serious about tackling this. And that's something which we hope to see but haven't yet seen.
Because I know the US Geological Survey said that nearly $1 trillion of untapped mineral deposits lie in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and the $1 trillion figure has been around for a while, and it assumes, of course, that you can get access to all those minerals. But what is really clear is that the minerals do have an enormous potential, and there aren't that many other sectors which have this potential to generate revenue for the Afghan government. There could be billions of dollars of revenue from mining as a whole in Afghanistan, and that's something which would be of enormous benefit to the Afghan government, to the Afghan people, and to the donors who I'm sure want to stop having to spend so much money on the Afghan government. But you look at things like the International Monetary Fund, and their projections for Afghan growth also rely on the growth of the mining sector. Instead, the mining sector is actually doing harm. So if we want any hope of a stable Afghanistan, if the Afghan people want this to provide them some benefit, then we have to start treating it as a real priority and not as something which is really of secondary interest.
Okay, thank you, Stephen, from Global Witness, for joining us. Pleasure having you.